You're carrying a debt someone else owes you, and it's costing you rent every single day. That grudge you're holding against the person who lied, who betrayed, who took something from you. It's running a tab on your mental bandwidth. And the strange part is, they probably stopped thinking about it months ago. Meanwhile, you're the one paying interest on their mistake. There's a study out of Stanford where researchers tracked participants through an 8-week forgiveness intervention. The people who completed it showed measurable drops in stress-related symptoms. Expected, maybe, but the part nobody talks about is what went up. Creativity scores, problem-solving ability, the capacity to generate new ideas under pressure. Forgiveness didn't just make people feel lighter, it made them functionally smarter. So why does holding a grudge drain creative energy specifically? Think about what resentment actually does inside your head. Every time you replay that conversation, re-argue that argument, rehearse what you should have said, you're running a simulation. A detailed, emotionally charged simulation that recruits the same cognitive resources you'd use to write a business plan, compose music, or solve a design problem. Your brain doesn't distinguish between I'm imagining a revenge fantasy and I'm imagining a new product. Both draw from the same well, one just poisons it on the way back up. A researcher at the University of Michigan found that people who scored high on measures of chronic resentment performed significantly worse on tasks requiring flexible thinking. The kind of thinking where you need to hold multiple possibilities in your head at once, discard the ones that don't work, and combine the survivors into something new. That's creativity. And resentment was sitting in exactly the seats creativity needed. The mechanism is almost embarrassingly simple. Your working memory has a fixed capacity, somewhere between 4 and 7 items at any given moment. When 3 of those slots are permanently occupied by the narrative of how you were wronged, you're trying to build a cathedral with half your tools locked in a box. You can still function, you can still produce, but everything you make carries the constraint of a mind that's partially elsewhere. And this is where it gets personal. You felt this. You know that week after a bad breakup, or a betrayal where you sit down to work and the screen just stares back at you, the words won't come. The ideas feel flat. You tell yourself you're tired or uninspired, but the real diagnosis is simpler. You're occupied. Your mind is in court, prosecuting a case it will never win, and it left the creative department understaffed. The ancient Stoics had a word for this kind of self-inflicted drain. They called it perturbatio, a disturbance of the soul that scatters attention across things you can't control. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it from the front lines of actual wars, which puts your co-worker's passive-aggressive email in perspective. His point was surgical. Every hour spent on anger toward another person is an hour stolen from your own work. The math is zero-sum. But forgiveness sounds like surrender. That's the part people choke on. Here's where most advice gets it wrong. They frame forgiveness as a gift you give the other person, a generous, saintly act of releasing them from their debt. And if that framing worked for you, you'd have done it already. The reason you haven't is because that framing asks you to lose twice, once when they wronged you, and again when you absorb the cost without repayment. Flip the frame. Forgiveness is an eviction notice. You're not releasing them. You're reclaiming the square footage in your head that they've been occupying without paying rent. Every grudge is a squatter in your cognitive architecture, and forgiving is the act of changing the locks. A psychologist at Virginia Commonwealth University measured what happens in the body during active resentment versus active forgiveness. During resentment, blood pressure climbed, muscle tension increased, and participants reported a sense of diminished control. During forgiveness exercises, the same participants showed cardiovascular patterns associated with challenge states, the physiological signature your body produces when it believes a problem is solvable. The body knows the difference between a cage and a doorway, even when the mind is still arguing about the decor. Now connect that back to creativity. Challenge states are exactly the conditions under which people produce their best work. That feeling of, this is hard but I can handle it, opens a window where risk-taking increases, associative thinking loosens, and novel connections fire more easily. Resentment slams that window shut. It puts the body into a threat state, where the priority becomes protection, narrowing defense. You can't write a symphony from behind a barricade. There's a detail from the Stanford study that still sits with me. Participants didn't just report feeling more creative, they described having more access to parts of themselves they'd forgotten. One participant said it felt like finding rooms in a house she didn't know she had. The grudge hadn't just blocked her output, It had walled off entire sections of her inner life. That image, rules you forgot you had. Think about what's behind your walls. Consider what happens when someone wrongs you and you decide to carry it. You build a story. The story has a villain, a victim, and a moral. And the story is probably accurate. They probably did what you think they did. The facts aren't the problem. The problem is that the story becomes structural. It starts as something you think from. Every new situation gets filtered through the lens of that betrayal. New people get measured against the person who hurt you. New opportunities get evaluated for the potential to recreate that pain. Your creative mind needs an open field. Resentment gives it a maze. Every idea has to navigate around the walls of your grudge before it reaches the surface. Some ideas are too fragile to survive the trip. The best ones, the weird, tender, surprising ones, are usually the first casualties. They need space and trust to develop, and a resentful mind offers neither. A colleague of mine once described unforgiveness as creative constipation, crude but accurate. Everything's backed up. The system has the raw material but can't move it through. Forgiveness acts as the release, and what comes after often surprises people. A burst of energy, a flood of ideas that feel like they were queued up behind a dam. Because they were. So what does real forgiveness actually look like, mechanically? The research points to a process, and it starts somewhere uncomfortable. You have to fully acknowledge what was taken from you. Premature forgiveness, the kind where you skip straight to "I'm over it," doesn't free anything. It just buries the resentment one layer deeper, where it runs on autopilot. Real forgiveness requires you to face the full weight of the wrong, feel the anger completely, and then make a deliberate decision about where your energy goes next. That decision is the hinge. Will you continue funding the prosecution, or redirect those resources to the construction project that actually builds something you want? The writer Anne Lamott once described forgiveness as giving up all hope of having had a better past. That precision cuts deep because it identifies the exact cognitive loop that drains you. Resentment is a time machine pointed backward, running on creative fuel, going nowhere. Every rehearsal of the wrong is an attempt to retroactively fix what happened, and the failure of each attempt generates more fuel for the next one. It's a perpetual motion machine of wasted energy. Forgiveness breaks the loop by accepting a single painful fact. This happened, and replaying it changes nothing except the size of the bill. The moment that lands, really lands, in the body, in the gut, the cognitive resources begin returning to the present, and the present is where all creative work happens. You can't paint yesterday, you can only paint now. The rooms are still there. The ones that got walled off when you decided someone else's betrayal was worth more of your attention than your own work. The locks haven't changed. Your hand just hasn't reached for the door in a while, because reaching toward those rooms means walking past the grudge, and the grudge has been standing in the hallway so long it started to feel like furniture. It was never furniture, it was always a blockade, and the only person it was keeping out was you.